Welcome to another episode of the Under the Pines podcast. I'm your host, Emanuel, and in today's episode, I speak to Jasper Degenaars, a human that, goes really deep on mycology, fungi, mushrooms, this whole realm. We really touch upon all kinds of different topics inside of that realm. We went to some history. We talked about Amanita muscaria. We talked about, adaptogenics. We talked about psilocybin. We talked about, psychedelics, of course, and also his work with the Fungi Academy. He is really knowledgeable in this field, and I think you will get a lot of value out of this. So, yeah, I'd invite you to, listen in on this. And yeah, if you get any value out of it, please share it with a friend. That would help a lot. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, hey, hello, Jasper. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Max.
So, you're a mycologist, and it's quite an uncommon profession. So, obviously, it interests me how you got into the field and when, and what were your motivators to go down that route in the first place.
Yeah. So just a disclaimer, I'm self-taught, or like the fancy way of saying is I'm autodidact.
Okay.
I was always interested in like mushroom cultivation, like when I was a young adult, but I couldn't just go and like take a mycology course in the Netherlands in university. Like I had to take a botany degree, and I was like, oh, and then like a couple years in, you can maybe get a minor in mycology, and that was just not so interesting to me. So I started, when I was 18. I'm from the Netherlands. I encountered truffles, like basically around my 18th birthday. And first I had like a mini dose, or what I call museum dose, where I definitely felt it, but I was not like fully within the psychedelic realms yet. And that piqued my interest to explore more. So one weekend, like the next weekend, basically my parents were out of town, and my siblings were out of town, and I just had the whole house to myself. And I was like, oh, just do like a large. I'll just eat the whole container of like truffles, which are sclerotia, which is a kind of a dense mass of mycelium.
Yeah.
Technically, the only thing that's legally sold in the Netherlands right now, but it contains psilocybin and psilocin and baeocystin and all these different psychedelic alkaloids. And basically, I had like a full-on experience. Well, like the story, which I've told more than other times now, but like the main idea being that like I read on Arrowhead, old school websites, for like psychedelic research, still active. Definitely go check that out. That maybe it's good for your first time to watch a cartoon or something on the come up. So I watched The Lion King, and then in that scene when Simba is like in the middle of the ravine and all the wildebeests come storming in, that's really when the truffles, the psilocybin started hitting. And I just got taken on this ride, and like The Lion King is actually based on Hamlet, like by Shakespeare, so it's actually pretty profound. And I was seeing all of these subliminal messages, and I was like spending too much time with Timon and Pumbaa in the jungle, and I had to live up to my potential as king. And then like there's this whole like scene that the kingdom is on fire, but then it re-rises from the ashes at the end and regrows. And I was like seeing that as metaphors for my own life, basically. And then I just smoked some weed out the window and listened to a lot of music and just started crying out of happiness. It was a really beautiful summer day, and I went out for a little bit, and I was like, damn, this is really good. Like, that's really what I realized. And then I started kind of buying them a lot. And then later on, a couple of weeks later, a month or so later, maybe even a little bit longer, after consuming them like several times a week, I like got into my friend's house, who was a little bit older than I was, and he had like a little mushroom grow kit just on his drawer. And I was like, damn, what's that? That's fucking cool. Oh shit, you can just buy these grow kits and then you can grow your own mushrooms. And I just did a quick little calculation, and my main motivation was that it was just going to be way cheaper for me to grow my own mushrooms. So I started doing that, and then I started going on the shroomery and like Mycotopia, and finding out that like I was buying grain spawn, and I was able to like add some coconut coir to the grain spawn, and then when I just get more mushrooms again, I was making what was like €4 an hour working at McDonald's or something. And yeah, that's kind of how it started. And I just like piqued an interest. And this is like 13 years ago now. I just turned 31. So the mushroom cultivation and just the interest in mushrooms and mycology has stayed with me for that long. And then 5.5 years ago, I joined the Fungi Academy. First to just like go a little bit deeper in cultivation, maybe visit there for a long time. But long story short, I just ended up there for way longer than I anticipated, became part of the leadership. And then when my mentor and friends and the founder of Fungi Academy, Oliver Merve, passed away at the end of 2020, kind of I had the option to like do my own thing or kind of carry on his legacy. So I'm stoked and proud to say that almost 4 years later now, we're still carrying on the vision that he brought into this world. So I'm incredibly honored and grateful to be doing this thing that I love doing for my livelihood.
Nice. So was he then one of your teachers that, kind of like brought you a level deeper into this whole realm? Would you say?
Yeah, I think he was mainly like
mentor.
A mentor, but also empowering. Like he was generally just like, oh, just start teaching. And I was like, oh man, I don't know enough. And then my first class was like 5 hours long and I was burned out and my students were like on the chair, like, whoa. So then I started realizing like, oh, I actually do know too much and I need to start condensing. And then I just started practicing sharing what I know every week or so. And he was just kind of like believing in me and like empowering me to step up, because before that I'd just been traveling the world and just being like carefree, like a bohemian hippie to an extent. And now I was dedicating my life to a mission and like working for myself, and taught me how to be, I hate this word, but an entrepreneur. And yeah, so he was a mentor in many ways. Yeah. And a really good friend.
Beautiful. So what is like your vision with that whole project and your mission probably as well?
That's a good question.
What's your goal with this?
I think the mission is like sharing the magic of fungal wisdom with the world. So it's like really getting people closer to understanding how impactful fungi are within our lives as well, right? And it goes from, of course, we have these psychedelic mushroom experiences that of course has a really big impact, but also like how fungi are crucial in our food production, how the fungi within the soils are actually like quintessential to life on Earth, like they're unmissable. But then also like fungi on our skin, we always have fungi on our skin. Like we only get these outbreaks when there's something not in balance in our lives, right? Like candida or yeast outbreaks. And so like there's no life on this planet without fungi. And I think like showcasing that to people in a fun and accessible way is kind of what I enjoy doing the most. And I do think it's also like important for people to connect more with their food and medicine. So growing your own food and growing your own medicines.
Yeah.
Or like foraging your own food and medicine and going out in the forest and connecting to like everybody's ancestors by picking a mushroom and then cooking that mushroom, right? Like correctly identifying the mushroom, knowing that you can eat it, and then picking it and cooking it. And that's something that our ancestors have been doing for like hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I don't think it's talked about enough. That's also one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this, because I think it's a topic that needs to be talked about more, especially, for like young children and kids and even grown-ups have no idea, right, how it's all connected, right? Like it's everywhere, right? Like you just mentioned a few, like my dad's from the medical field, and like I learned pretty early on, right? Like a lot of medical research is basically based on, right, that whole realm. And like, holy shit, and nobody talks about that, right? Like all these major medicines, so-called, right? Like in the Western medicine field, at least, they're based on this, right? And then once you start digging deep, almost, and then you start digging deep, and it's like it's all connected, right? And then you understand, okay, basically in the forest, communication is there, right? Like everything is there. In the body is the same thing, right? And it just keeps on going and going and going. So, what do you think where that intelligence comes from, like within that whole realm? Like do you have an idea where it originates?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, right? Like I think to answer that question, we first have to portray to the listeners how fungi function within ecosystems, right? So like you might have heard of what mycelium is. And if you look at mycelium, it very much looks like the nervous system of within our body, right? And like what mycelium does is transport nutrients, but also we know that through electromagnetic impulses, it transfers communication. So basically, the mycelium is a very large, spread out, like nervous system of the soil. Like this is, of course, more complex and there's more nuance to this. Yeah. But if you look at just like density of biomatter, we're very dense. Humans are super dense, and almost nothing is as dense, right? Like our brains is one of the most dense collections of neurons on the planet that we find. And fungi are just more spread out, right? But like if you look at the total biomass of a mycelial mat, let's say in a forest, it's humongous, right? And it's because we have this really concentrated mass of neurons, it's harder for us to relate to something that has a less concentrated set of neurons. But like the total biomass is even beyond that of like ours as individuals. So I do think that like we have to appreciate that by itself, and that can lead to the question: are fungi intelligent? Well, they're definitely intelligent because they make very, very intelligent decisions within ecosystems. But then are they sentient or conscious? Then like we have to like really like find out what that means, because we also have to understand that like how we portray conscious is how communicating, right? Like, oh, this bird, like this, we can communicate, they're conscious, they're aware, but like fungi can't even move, right? So we might argue that dolphins and whales are conscious because we can relate to them. They make sounds as well that we portray as language. But after studying fungi, now scientists are portraying that fungi on a nervous system-like level have these electromagnetic impulses within the mycelial system that looks a lot like how our body processes language. So it's just that fungi work on this whole different dimension, and they communicate with their environment through biochemistry instead of physically like we do in our body. And of course, we also do it biochemically, right? We have pheromones, and we are also biochemical organisms, but on a different frequency than the fungi. So I don't know if we're going to get to a point that we can directly communicate with mushrooms in a physical sense, but some people would argue that taking psychedelic mushrooms is the bridge, right? So that the fungi produce these alkaloids like psilocybin, psilocin, and steaocystin for us humans to understand their frequency of consciousness, and so they can communicate with us.
Yeah, just had Dakota Wind on the podcast and David Reed like a couple days ago, and we talked about what the mushroom is telling or told them, right, in their one of their experiences, right, and like the learnings from it and stuff. And then you think about it, like why is it telling you that in that moment in time, right? Like it's an interesting one, right? Because obviously then we come into this whole conversation, okay, psychedelics, God, right, like the higher intelligence there. And I mean, there is some communication going on there, right? And I think it's a super hard question, but it's just an interesting one. I don't know if you want to go down that route, but like, what were some of your experiences with like psychedelics in that, let's say in that small field here of the fungi and the mushrooms? Do you want to talk about those a little bit? Like, is there anything that stands out to you?
Well, there's so many, right? Like they're just an integral part of who I am becoming and who I have became. So I don't know. There's a long
maybe I
learning.
can elaborate a bit. Because we talked about spiritual practice, right? And asking ourselves, okay, what is the spiritual practice in this, right? Because like there's people that constantly just go for the next trip, kind of a little bit like how you did it when you were super young, right? And they don't really integrate, right? They don't listen to the lesson in it, right? So is that the spiritual practice, right? Like to keep evolving and like to move forward, right? Or what is it? That's kind of these questions that we're talking about.
No, that's big. I think it's also interesting to portray that, like, if you talk to especially indigenous peoples from the Amazon, that they kind of laugh at the idea of like having to integrate, and they would say it's like, go plant a tree and that's your integration, right? Because that's kind of how their culture works and how their relationship to these sacraments work. So I think I found natural ways of integrating. Basically, like honestly listening to the lessons and not just like bypassing these changes that I had to make. And of course, there's still like it is forever evolving, right? Like when do we become complete? You can argue that like we can reach a stage of Buddhahood and be completely like elevated and enlightened. But I don't think anybody ever fully gets there. I think it's like we need these reminders, and even if you get big lessons from psychedelics, it doesn't mean that like, oh, now they're forever changed. And I think that's more what I refer to as integration. Is like, okay, how to actually listen to these what people in the scene can call the downloads and integrate them into your life, right? And like, how do you make these big behavioral changes in your life? And that's difficult. And I think the best way to do this is honestly community. And this can be actually living in a sort of like community mecca that like of like, you know, a hippie village, or as the meme people say, like, oh, we're going to buy a plot of land with my friends and we're going to build a community and we all live together. And often those fail because people romanticize this idea. But like community can also be like when I'm in Guatemala, I'm part of a weekly men's circle. And one thing that we do is like we make a stretch to the men's circle, right? It's like, this week I want to meditate every day for 15 minutes. And then we hold each other accountable to that. So I think nobody wants to show up and like, I didn't do it week after week, because like nobody wants to be a person that is not true to their word or is like all talk and no show. So I do think that these systems of accountability that are naturally occurring within, I think, our communities, as long as we speak up and speak open about the change that we want to see in ourselves and others, are quite crucial, at least for my process. Like doing these changes by myself has been hard, because then you can start like downplaying. It's like, oh, I'm just being gentle with myself. Oh, I'm not going to go work out right now, though. Like I had that really strong vision that like my life would be so much better if I would like work out every day. And like, that's just kind of how it is, right? So community, I think, is the key aspect to integration and like deep spiritual transformation, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I agree. Did you just run into this? So you were just by accident in a men's group all of a sudden, or how did you understand that this was crucial to you?
I'd done like kind of like walk-in men's groups before, of like when I was traveling, and I found it very powerful, and especially seeing the brothers that had done a lot of work together, like go to really deep processes and I'd be really vulnerable in this container. And I thought that was really, really interesting and fascinating. And when it kind of showed that I was going to be living in Guatemala for a while, I was like, let's just start a men's. Like, actually what happened is there was a closed off men's circle happening that some of my friends, including Oliver, were a part of. And somehow some of the men in that group like didn't want me part of it. I was like a lot younger than the rest of the group, so maybe that was the reason. And they wanted to keep it exclusive. And I was like, fuck it, I'll just start my own. And I invited some friends and we just started coming together every week, and that kind of created the foundation for that men's group. And then that kind of fell loose when Oliver passed away. And then I think like 7 months later, there was a brother that had been working with the Mankind Project that joined, like they came to the lake and they kind of rekindled that without me at first. And then I joined back in later, and that's still the group that we've been working with ever since. So it's it's really powerful to see that continuous container.
Yeah, it's not really common, right, in these countries that we grew up in. I grew up in Germany, you grew up in the Dutch lands, and
the Dutch lands. We're swamp Germans, as the internet likes to call us.
So it's I mean, I always had this feeling, that I wanted a brother, just had a older sister, and always had this thing missing, right? So I get that it works for you. I was never part of never part of a men's group or anything like that. I just worked through my stuff mostly with coaches and teachers and guides and
Uh-huh.
myself was my path to get to this point where I'm at right now. But like I feel it could be the next step, right? To maybe, you know, work with other people, and I think the accountability part is big, right? Because I know exactly what you're saying, right? Like you can bullshit yourself, you know, your ego comes in on a daily basis, right? Like there's excuses, and yeah, but if you have a, you know, accountability partner that keeps you, you know, real, there's no way out of it, right?
And this can also be a coach or a therapist
Yeah.
or any of that. I just found that like that group container is because everybody's doing the work, right? Like when you're working with a coach or a therapist, and I do think it's time for my life to also explore working with a therapist. I've never done that. But I'm intrigued, right? Yeah, I'm intrigued on like how that works. I've worked with coaches before, and that's sometimes kind of like that's is business related, but then also like social related. But like with the peer-to-peer situation is that like it's beautiful because everybody's doing the work, and then also with it, like even if I'm sitting there and my brother, like my friend, is going through like his process, and I relate to that because we all have like all of the same shit, you know. And I think that comes out really powerfully in these men's groups is that like the understanding that we're not alone, right? Like we're all faced with certain forms of addiction, and like there's some people that look like they have their shit together, and they have like imposter syndrome, or they actually don't have their shit together in certain parts, and it's like really affirming in humanity that we're like, damn, like we're all in this together. And I think that
struggling.
that can, yeah, with certain stuff, right? That's part of the human experience, like the challenge.
Totally. Yeah, I always like to say, you know, nobody knows what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, like 100%. Nobody knows what to do.
It's just the way it is, right? It's just
I'm like,
yeah, go for it.
I'm like my parents' age right now when they had me, and I thought like, you know, you think your parents have their shit together, and I'm like, damn,
right.
I think I have my shit together, but like I also have not my shit together at all.
Yeah, there's always pillars that we have to work on, right? Like everybody has their different, you know, major kind of work to do in the different fields, and in the end, it's an individual journey, and that's I think that's probably the good part about these groups. You know, when you hear the different stuff, and maybe you're not there yet, but you know you'll be there in a year's time. And you know, me with kids now, you know, I think it's important to talk about like, you know, the shift that you have in life, right? Because it's not about you anymore, right? And it's nobody really, you know, a lot of these life coaches, they don't have kids, right? And then they keep on coaching men, you know, and they're like, yeah, sure, go for a date, you know, twice a week with your wife. I'm like, how the fuck's that supposed to work? You know, you have 2 kids at home, right? Like, it's impossible. You know, it's like that's like this illusion sometimes, right? Like that you know, there's this thing that fits everyone, and I think that's also a problem, right? Like with these online coaches, a lot of times, right? Because it's just, yeah, you know, it's a lot just business related in the end, right?
But yeah, it depends on like the kind of coach, I guess. But
sure,
I think again, like, you know, understanding the relate, like, because you don't know the intricacies of the life of your coach as they do of yours. Let's say keep it at that, right? So I think that makes the dynamic more difficult. Yeah, sometimes definitely. It can also be super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I work with so many different ones, and I probably would say, you know, 90% of the time, the ones that really helped me, they didn't go that regular, you know, university route. Like I'm a psychologist now and all that kind of stuff, right? Like it's a lot like these people that kind of, you know, went through the shit, and that they taught themselves, and then they did some additional certification and stuff. But like those were really the ones that helped me personally, for example, right? And I tried with these clinical psychologists and stuff, just didn't get anywhere. It's like a waste of time, basically, right? So yeah. So just maybe, you know, for you, like, you should also, you know, check out these so-called not regular therapists, right? Because they are probably a lot of times like you know, the people that can really get you from A to B.
Yeah, and the somatic therapist, and then there's
exactly.
There's a whole like spectrum. I've just been intrigued to see what that work would look like, but I'm very picky, right? So I'm waiting generally with like, oh, when the right person comes on my path, that will come on my path.
Yeah. You like that type that surrenders to the happenings and to life. Is that how you operate?
Yeah, anytime I fight, it's just more difficult. So I end up just surrendering. I think generally, like, I did a lot of solo travel with very little money, and then like with very little planning as well. And then I think the magic that occurs when you surrender to the flow of life and what like stuff just comes up, that's incomparable to what can happen if you completely plan stuff out. Like, okay, good example. I was lucky enough and blessed enough to step away from my business for 2 months and like travel Japan for 2 months. It was fucking phenomenal. And we had this plan. Okay, we had this route planned for that day, and we were almost there. Like, almost had like 100K of cycling already. We were tired, lots of mountains, and then my friend slips and like hurts his hand. So we like take care of the hand, get the gravel out, and we get to the onsen where we're planning to stay, but now we're too late and they're closed. And we're like, damn, fuck, oh, what do we do? And we end up like just deciding to drive down to the next town because we ran out of food. We just hoped we could get food there. That was not an option. So the drive down was one of the best like descents because the sun was setting and it was this beautiful river valley, and like we get to a restaurant and it was some of the nicest people we met and the nicest food, and we ended up just sleeping next to the river, and like we met so many cool people that were just intrigued in our bike traveling stories. And that wouldn't have happened if we would have been like, no, this was the plan, we should stay here, and like we could just go somewhere else and like eat some vending machine food or something. So like we could have resisted, or we just went with the flow in that moment, and that just ended up being way better than we could have imagined.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Anytime I plan like way too much, then I get that slap, and something magical happens and it stops, right? Like, just like, wait a second, like you're too German here. Don't do this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I traveled like in my early 20s. I traveled a lot for a couple of years and did the same. You just bought one-way tickets always, and it was a good time. Just with the backpack, and it's different, when you don't really have a lot of shit, right? And everything fits in a backpack. Like, it teaches you, right, how this thing works in the end, right?
Makes life easier too. And I'm
Yeah.
more like I just didn't bring my like 70-liter backpack this time around than I before I had the
Mm,
bike. I just had a 30-liter backpack, and I just like did several weeks through the US like that. Fucking fantastic.
yeah.
So good. I'm like, yeah, less stuff, less worries. That's what
Yeah.
we're about.
Yeah, totally. It took me, I think, like the fourth time I left for a big trip, then I had less stuff in my bag. Like, 3 times I just took way too much and didn't even use half of it. Right? You think you
There
do,
you
but
go.
you don't. Yeah, 75 liters, whatever it was, like way too much. But yeah, that cool lessons, and I think that's everyone should do this when they're young. Just a side note, it's the right thing to do.
I think it's like, oh, this is an interesting thing to talk about. Is that like uh, you probably did this as well, but I created my own rite of passage, because if you look at
Mm,
traditional cultures, like let's call them
mm,
indigenous cultures, there's always a rite of passage for like when a boy becomes a man, and our
yeah,
culture is just completely missing that. We don't have that anymore, and that's
totally.
such a miss, right? Because that's why so many young men, especially feel out of place in the world, or they just go through the hamster wheel that's been laid out for them, and like go to university, pick something they don't enjoy doing. Oh, then they get a job that they don't enjoy, and then get a mortgage. But I think when you explore the freedom to just sit with your own thoughts and do the things that you want to do, and some people party for a couple of years, that's fine too. But I think
Yeah,
if we as an like society can get more structured and having a sort of a ceremony, but not like you entered a boy and you came out a man, I think that'd be incredibly powerful and world shifting.
yeah, it's very important. I mean, we don't even have the fathers at the home anymore, right? Like, it goes
Ah,
it goes a level above that, right? Like children are, kind of taught by the system,
mhm.
and then the result you see out there right now. Like, I talk about this on this podcast, often, like homeschooling and this type of stuff,
Mhm.
because I think it's the way to go. Like, I don't think it's possible anymore to leave your child in that, systemic kind of setup. Like, doesn't work. It's the wrong
But it's also
path.
difficult, right? Because like to live
It's
a,
very.
a cushy life, you need to have both parents need to have a job, right? So that's
Yeah.
the whole situation. How like the schooling system evolved to begin with. It was kiddie jail because both parents were able to work in the factory. So
Yeah.
I think, you know, there's a lot of privilege in that, and then, you know, some like it's also hard to kind of stabilize because some people, you know, I'm certain that you and many of your listeners of your podcast are responsible people making sure that their education of their kid is the forefront. But unfortunately, some people are negligent, right? And like this can also occur, right? That like in places where there's homeschooling, certain parents don't like teach their kids how to read, and then like
Sure.
they're like a young adult and they don't know how to read. So how do you maintain like the fair chances that, like, to an extent fair chances that the system gives with this fusion of homeschooling and allowing that? That's there's so much to it, right? Like I wish it was just as simple as like, oh, everybody should just homeschool.
Yeah.
I think it could be a lot easier and more accessible if there's universal basic income, which I think is completely possible, and more funding for these kind of things.
Yeah. Well, might be coming, right? It's already there in some countries.
Makes sense. Money is
Yeah.
all
Well.
like a
Yeah.
facade anyway, and like
Yeah.
it's a fall of the system that there's so many billionaires, right? So
Of
just give all
course.
the money back.
Yeah. It's just going to be interesting when when it's tokenized, and then it's basically only spendable on certain brands, and then we're already down the wrong path, because then
Yeah,
it's the end game, right?
yeah, but yeah, it's not easy, right? I think,
Yeah.
you know, our bodies are not made to live in these very large global systems, and trying to figure that out is a big challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I just moved to an island like during COVID, basically, from the city, and it was the last time I was going to live in the city, and I just went back like to Prague last year. It was the last time I was in a big city for a couple of days, and I'm like, fuck, no way, I'm going to move back to this the stressful environment. When I was younger, I liked it, right? I lived in London and like Bogota and stuff like that, and it was cool. But now, no way, just it's too big, right?
Yeah,
But
especially
yeah,
if you have a family, I guess, you know, it's like I
yeah,
think there's
exactly.
magic to cities as well, and you know, you're already so scrammed for time, and I feel anytime I'm in the city, I'm just like, well, I have less time. I'm just always like, wow, now is this happening and this happening.
Yeah,
Simpler
definitely,
is better.
definitely. Let's talk about like some compounds that you like, that you especially want to talk about. Like, is there anything that stands out to you?
Um, like psychedelic compounds
Yeah,
generally.
psychedelic compounds, anything to do with your work that you indulge yourself
Yeah,
in.
yeah, I think so. A lot of people keep referring to psychedelic, what we refer to as sacred mushrooms, like psilocybin mushrooms, and I think that's kind of derogatory. I think a recent study has showcased that like a hot water extraction of psilocybe cubensis, which is the most widely popular cultivated psychedelic mushroom, was more effective in clinical trials for people with treatment-resistant depression than the isolated synthesized psilocybin molecule, right? So it just showcases that psilocybin by itself isn't as effective, and therefore I think calling these mushrooms only psilocybin mushrooms is cool, right? Like it's the part of the lingo right now, but I think it's to an extent derogatory, and I think it's not in full respect for the organism in its entirety. So there's all other compounds, right? So like psilocybin isn't even bioactive, so it has to be dephosphorized in the liver and turned into psilocin, and then psilocin passes the blood-brain barrier and attaches to the 5-HT2A receptors and creates the psychedelic experience. So what else attaches to the 5-HT2A receptor is mescaline, LSD, DMT,
Mm.
MDMA, most other tryptamines, right? So that's kind of that base level. And all of those compounds, I think, are super incredibly interesting. And another recent study showcased that the stimulation of this 5-HT2A receptor, or the serotonin 2A receptor, is now linked to the rapid increase in our brain size. So there seems to be a correlation with consuming of these molecules, these compounds, and our brain size of our proto-human ancestors rapidly increasing over a relatively short period of time. And maybe you and your listeners know about Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory. Well, that's kind of some scientific backing on this idea of McKenna, that our ancestors were moved out of this ecosystem, this abundant ecosystem, and were forced onto a savanna-like ecosystem and had to kind of look for food in not the best places. And this includes like the scat of animals, which we've seen most mammals, most primates, our most like relatives, like chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, have all been found looking through poop from time to time. So they look through poop. What did they find? They found this large, appealing looking mushroom, and they consume this. And then what happens, right? Like how do we go from primates like bonobos and chimpanzees to what we are today? And McKenna's idea was like the consumption of these mushrooms. He had this outrageous idea that like it's a slight aphrodisiac against maybe our ancestors that were consuming these mushrooms would actually have these large mushroom-fueled orgies, which is funny, and I think could be a lot of fun to think about. I don't think it's in reality, but there's an argument that like small amounts of consumption of these mushrooms would make you a better hunter and a better gatherer, so you could like have more food security. But I really think that like to an extent, to say it in the most woo-woo way I can, is that these mushrooms taught us language and inspired us to start communicating on more profound levels in more complicated manners. Mm-hmm. And then language evolved, and then the people that were best at expressing language ended up becoming the most desirable mates, and then they would pass on the genes for expressing that language that also had to do with brain size, and that rapidly just increased in tandem perhaps with the consumption of these mushrooms. It's kind of like how I perceive it to be. But yeah, I don't know where else you want to go. Like these, we can talk for hours.
I mean, whatever. Yeah, whatever interests you, man. Like, what do you think? Which tribes were, like in which areas of the world was that?
This is all in Africa. This is all in Africa. This is like way before Homo erectus, right? So Homo erectus is kind of like our the first human-like organism that started walking upright. They probably were the ones that figured out fire, and were using stone tools. They were they're called erectus because they were walking upright, right? Upright man, and they started moving out of Africa as the first group. All of our other proto-human ancestors, they stayed within Africa. So anything up to that point is like within Africa. So this was definitely happening in Africa, probably like East Central Africa, kind of around Kenya. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where that happens.
Yeah, it's interesting topics, right? Is that stuff that you think is being taught the right way, like especially like in our young years, or do you think it's kind of distorted a bit? There's like crucial stuff missing in this whole history lesson that we just had in 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay, so I think generally like history is a thing that is completely mistaught. Like most people hated history in school. And I think in England, like, I don't know, like in German it's probably a different word too. It's like in Dutch we call it geschiedenis, which means kind of the happening of the past, I think is a way to translate it. Yeah. And like in English it's like literally his story. But I think if you would call it our story, and like the story of humans, and scrap remembering all the boring dates, but really focus on like those stories, right? They're fantastical, amazing stories that I think apply to our lives, and they're real, right? Like I think a lot of people, including myself, like reading fiction, but history is as exciting, but just real. And I think like it's just a showcase of bad teachers, and luckily in the day and age of the internet, we have amazing history teachers. If you're into history, like Dan Carlin's Hardcore History is like phenomenal. I listened to all of them, and that re-sparked my interest in looking into the more quote unquote boring topics, and then suddenly start seeing these connections happen, and I feel like I have a understanding of how to an extent the world got to be to where it is right now. And that's just really cool, right? Like that when Genghis Khan invaded Baghdad in the 1200s, like it destroyed, I don't think it's Genghis Khan, I think it was his son or grandson, but like the Mongols invaded and destroyed Baghdad and destroyed the irrigation channels, right? And it like turned that whole part of the world from like one of the centers of the Enlightenment before we had the Enlightenment in Europe into kind of a desert wasteland. And that's still being felt right now, right? So it's like, okay, we all have these, we all live in a causal world, and all of these things that have been set in motion even thousands of years ago. Like even the reason why Europe is like it is because Julius Caesar like killed all the Celts up to literally where I was like raised, like just under the Rhine River in the Netherlands. That's like crazy, right? And that we still have the ramifications, and that's why we don't have indigenous practices, because like that whole thing got wiped out. Then Christianity took over that whole situation when the Romans fell, and like it's just unbelievable. That's why we don't have paganism in Northern Europe anymore, and then that's how we became the Europeans and like our ancestors became more vile and started like pillaging people from all over the world, right? It's all connected. And I think if people have a good teacher that's able to portray these stories in an interesting way, and it's the same for the stories of biology, for physics, for homeschooling, for any of these topics that interest us, right? Like I think everybody relates to the idea that like we all have like one teacher that really changed our view on this topic. And I think teachers are just not like compensated enough, and they're overworked, and it's perhaps the most important job in the world.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's even a level above. You know, it's like they're not supposed to, have more freedom to teach whatever they want. Because I remember I had in German, public school, I had like 2 or 3 good teachers in those 10 years that I was there. And as soon as they wanted to introduce something additional to the curriculum of the class, they got like penalized by the school.
Yeah.
They got like right away, they got slapped on the hands, like, just shortly after that. So they're not allowed to think outside the box. They're not supposed to, you stick to whatever you told that you have to teach them, and that's it, right? And that's the sad thing about it, because there you can see, right, that how it's supposed to be. And it, like what you said before, it was in the end, it was supposed to be for factory workers, and to build these types of communities and these types of humans, right, that don't really ask that many questions and just follow the lead, right?
Yeah, unfortunately that's the case. And of course there's alternatives, right? Especially in the West, like there's Montessori schools, and there's like the free schools that like have a very different approach that like I think are a great alternative for the people that don't have the option of homeschooling their kids, right? And I think there should be a lot more focus and like the fucking incredible amounts of wealth that we've accumulated from exploiting our planet and like taking out all these resources, like that should have been going should be going there. Like that's the whole thing. And I wonder also if you have like more like open free school systems, right? I'm always wondering like if like I think there's a great example. This might like turn some people the right way, but if like there was actually funding for Adolf Hitler to be accepted to art school in Austria, right? Like we have had the Second World War, and that's of course very long back, but like he didn't have that like outlet, and he wasn't encouraged to pursue his art, and like he probably was not the nicest person to begin with, but like that probably catalyzed him to on the path that he eventually got set on, and could be a different world. Like, and like I'm not saying that like these are being created right now. But I do think is that if somebody is interested in doing that, we should, as a society, make it our biggest effort into supporting that, as long as it is for the greater good of the society. And I think art is definitely something for the greater goods of the society. And
yeah, for sure.
Just like technology is.
Yeah, definitely. I think the main thing could be to just kind of help kids find something they're good at, right? Because like it doesn't work in that area at all, right? Like it's a complete opposite actually. Like you have to kind of know everything a little bit, right? And you don't even have the time to focus on anything, like in particular, right? And you just end up, being, I don't know, like after 12th grade or 11th grade, and you have no fucking clue what to do, right? And then we don't have these rites of passage that we just talked about, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then like what the hell is going on, you're like supposed to study something, all of a sudden you have no idea what to do, and then you just do something that you're told, right, or that out of the media that could be interesting, job wise, right? Because it kind of portrays a certain persona that you might want to be or whatnot, right? And also what you said before, like in terms of pagans, and like basically that's which happened, right? Like that's why we don't have rites of passage anymore. That's why we don't have
Mm-hmm.
these knowledge systems, right? That's why all of a sudden we go to Africa, we go to South America, right, to learn from these people, and to we travel there to do medicine or plant medicines, right? And actually I think,
Mushroom medicine, mushroom
right,
growing plants.
exactly, and I think we had it here on the continent as well,
Yeah,
ultimately, right? But like just as you said, later during Christianity, right, like these people were the witches, right? Like they were burned, right? You were not
yeah.
supposed to talk about this, right? Like it's,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what happened, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in, obviously, right? Because we're completely lost that part of being, in a sense, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like we lost the roots to ourselves, and like I think it was last year, year and a half ago, I sat with an elder. It's a Lakota elder from like Dakota
Mm-hmm.
in the United States, and like they like he comes from his culture, and they still practice these traditional ways of being, and it's so like there's so much profound wisdom in like how they look at themselves and culture, and like how like they have their rituals and their rites of passage and all these things that like maybe people are familiar with if you sat with them or if you've seen popular media. And like next to them, like looking at Dutch culture, it just feels silly. Like we're just silly, like kind of goofy, weird beings instead of these powerful, like to an extent even like insightful, deep thinking individuals that I see to be created. I'm not speaking for everybody. This is obviously a person that has chosen to go after, like really dive deep in that path. But like we really lost something in that, and I don't think it's impossible for us to get it back, right? I don't think we should copy paste from the current indigenous peoples, but like now is the time, and even also for our psychedelic rituals and sacraments, now is the time for us to reinvent ourselves, right? Like how do we want to be going to the future, right? Like we understand where we came from, that's great, and like how do we re-indigenize our lives to an extent?
Yeah, maybe just listen in, right? And maybe there is still something going on, right? Maybe we can find some knowledge, right? Like some old wisdom somewhere, right? But it's not really talked about at all in Europe, right? Like it's every time I speak to anyone about these topics, right? Like everyone learns about this abroad, right? Like no one learns about this in the Nordics or in Germany, right? Like it's those are the wrong places. And what you just talked about, right? Like this tribal structure, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
tribe goes above the
Individual.
individuum, yeah,
Uh-huh.
right. So it doesn't matter what happens to you, it's always tribe first, right? And that's how they survive, because like I listened to a guy talk about this as well, and like very wise, and he also talked about how smallpox completely eradicated them, almost, I think, like 5% or so survived, right? And
Yeah.
then the buffalo was gone, and then all these new plants were introduced into the area as well, right? And then
Uh-huh.
slavery and all that stuff, like it was super close that they were completely wiped out, and they kind of made it out. And I think probably that tribal structure was the last thing, right? That little that little grain that could still grow out of it in the end.
Yeah, and they had to hide that too, right? So the
Mm,
water drum is like the classical instrument. They had to make them look like pots, like cast iron pots. So like
mm,
they like when people would come to see if they had any of the things that were illegal, they had to
yeah.
move that. So that's that immense amount of tragedy and oppression that happened in those times is real. And like for us, like how do we like reignite that. Like what I see when I speak to Lakota people in Central America or from South America or like Aborigines in Australia, is that there's an actual listening to nature happening. And that's just something that like there seems to be a harmony with the natural ecosystem, while especially post Renaissance, there has been almost this push of let's call it Western culture to dominate nature. And I think that's the biggest mistake that is still being made and that we're still making, is that like we even talk about like, oh, I need to connect more with nature. Well, we are fucking nature. We need to connect more with ourselves through that as well. Like thinking that we are separate, that we are not the animals, that like certain people are not like still like can't call ourselves primates or like monkeys. Well, in reality, that's what we are, right? Like that's also doing disservice to our heritage, the heritage of the natural world, Pachamama, Mother Earth, whatever you want to call it, right? Like that's also who we are. And that's, I think, a first step that we need to start recognizing, that we are, it's not us versus the earth, right? And like, there's the whole thing is like, oh, we're destroying the earth. We're not destroying the earth. You can't fucking destroy the earth. No, we're killing ourselves. We're destroying the humans and every other living organism. But when we cause a mass extinction event, the fungi will be there and they will just like recreate, like recycle everything and prepare everything for the next cycle of life. We probably won't be there at that stage. I hope we will be there. But as we're going right now, and like this whole narrative of destroying the earth is just, it's so filled with like ego, like that we think we're capable of doing that is just silly to me.
Yeah, it's remarkable, you know, in a not so positive sense, and it baffles me every single time, you know, especially, you know, here I'm on an island and I see people, you know, throw stuff in the ocean and the cigarettes and like it's just these basics, you know. It's like just use your brain just for a little bit, right? And like I think I'm so
or use your hearts, right? Man.
Yeah, of course. But even, you know, like we're completely detached from that already, right? And so at least that one, and then maybe you can find back to your heart, right? Because I think that one is the harder one to do in the end, right? But I think that's so good about traveling, right? Because I don't know, I was in India in my early 20s and I saw, you know, like, fuck, right? This is how it can go, you know? Like, this is how it can really look like if you don't pay attention to your surroundings, and then if you really do not care. And, you know, when you go to these islands, like somewhere, you know, and around there, and then you see all the garbage in the back, and like it makes you think, right? Like, because when you grow up in these bubbles, you know, these cities that are kind of, you know, like kind of look sleek, right? They kind of look clean, but you know, you don't really see behind the curtain.
But that's because we're ahead, you know. It's like our cities, like 300 years ago, were the grossest, most filthy places on the planet, and we just had to like learn from that and change our habits, because people were dying because of how dirty these cities were. And then like on other sides of the world, they just had less of that. Like, but then also still right now you see less of that, right? Like, for example, in Japan, it's like, if anybody would go back 500 years in time and be anywhere in the world, most places would be filthy and dirty. But like somehow in Japanese culture, if you read the stories of like the early Edo periods, like cities were clean, rivers were clean, like, and there was millions of people living in these cities, right? So that just like, it's a cultural thing, and that's really what it is. I don't think it is an intelligence thing, because I know plenty of intelligent people that, as long as it's culturally acceptable, throw something out. And especially for the case for Southeast Asia and Mesoamerica, these people didn't have plastics like 40 years ago. So they were just used to throw, like eating a banana and throwing the peel, and like it was just mold. And now they just like, they have that same habit, and culturally and educationally to an extent as well, that hasn't gotten into the point of like, hey, you probably should stop doing that. But then also these countries are corrupt, and there's not the infrastructure for collecting the garbage and all of that stuff. So it's like, man, like there also has to be some empathy when you see these other cultures. And we have this facade of cleanliness, especially within Europe, because I'm in North America right now, and man, some of these cities, especially in the United States, are as bad as the worst third world country I've ever seen, especially the homelessness problem. And solutions, like, I think, can be relatively simple, and because we are living in this global system. Okay, what is working for other countries, right? What can we look at, like, certain parts of Scandinavia and maybe even certain parts of the Netherlands or Germany, and like implement that so that doesn't repeat themselves within the United States.
Yeah, there's a lot of angles we could take this. I would like to go, back to some of the stuff that you think about, I think. And what is do you think one of, or is there any fungi with untapped potential? Any compound that you've seen in your work these last couple of years?
Well, there's a lot of them with untapped potential, right? Like direct compounds are, like, I'm not a biochemist, so like it gets pretty complicated from there on, right? So it's like, I think more people are discovering Amanita muscaria to work with, which I think has a lot of potential and is still legal everywhere in the world, and it grows wild everywhere in the world. And our ancestors have been working with this mushroom in most parts of the northern hemisphere. So yeah, I think that'd be an interesting one to look into, but I think it takes a little bit more. It's not like if you do anything above a microdose, it is not a light affair. So I think it needs a little bit more preparation, and especially like reading on the subject before taking that journey. But that might be interesting. But there's also tons of like fungi. Fungi is just such a large plethora right now. Like people are making materials from like reishi mycelium, right? Like anything from leather to houses to surfboards, and like I can keep going for a while here. But I think the biggest untapped potential, what we see like a massive increase in right now, is the capacity for fungi to eat plastics, right? And that's kind of that situation that we just talked about. Like there is a potential to solve this plastic in the ocean and the plastic everywhere issue. Like we just need to put more funding towards these fungi that were recently discovered to be being able to produce break down polyurethane plastic in its entirety in less than half a year, right? That's no time. So if we spend like, let's say 100, 200 million on this, that's nothing in the grand scheme of things. I'm sure we can identify which compounds these fungi are producing, which is actually enabling this decomposition of these plastics, right? And then you work together with, for example, Boyan Slad's ocean cleanup project, and like spend more money on cleaning up the oceans and stopping new plastics from getting in the oceans, and like producing these specialized plastic treatment facilities, and then like kind of having a great way of like cleaning those plastics, preparing them for this decomposition with these compounds. Like that like the technology is all there if we spend some money on it. So again, like I think a lot of like the mycological sector just needs more funding, and we need more people going out and getting to know the mushrooms and studying mushrooms and sending mushrooms to labs and like finding out like, oh damn, this mushroom produces this compound. We didn't even know that was possible, right? But for all that, we need to have more mycophilic people that are loving mushrooms and fungi and are interested in looking towards that. And we need more funding on the scientific ends to actually see these fungi up to their fullest potential.
Yeah, so the first step is to talk about this, right? I think these conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, and maybe we can do another one where we go into more depth with a certain topic, right? Maybe that helps as well. Just like really go specific on something. But yeah, let's talk about Amanita muscaria a bit, like because to me that was one that I always deemed poisonous, right? Like as a child, because like you have these cartoons, right, and it's always the poison, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting. Like why do you think the story that we're being told is that way?
Well, I think it's a lie, and I feel like you seem to be in certain counter agendas, and I do think that there's an intentional lie that is being told for whatever reason, because it's just so abundant that I guess they can't make it illegal because it grows like wildfire in certain places. So I think the best way is just deem it poisonous, and this might have been like way back, way back, right? Like so I was also thought it was poisonous, right? And then I learned it was to an extent dissociative, psychedelic, perhaps hallucinogenic. Like it is definitely a powerful mind-altering mushroom. Let's keep it at that. But then recently I learned that it's also like a great edible. And if you prepare it correctly, you can just eat it and you don't get like high, you don't get sick, and it's super tasty. Most amanitas are generally very tasty, even the ones that can kill you. But that aside, right? Amanita muscaria has a large history of use. I think the most recorded one is of the Sami people with the traditional shamans in Siberia working with the reindeer. And the story says that like the reindeer would eat them and they would collect the urine of the reindeer and then they would consume the muscimol and the ibotonic acid, but that's all the less so fun alkaloids that are present. But you can like even fully dehydrate a cap and eat a cap, and a cap is a lot. So like again, prepare a lot and know what you're doing out here. But like, and you can have that experience, and you're definitely not gonna die. It's a lot of drooling. I recently was at a talk and somebody like described it the best way. Like you're just gonna be drooling and like salivating, and if a woman is giving like breastfeeding, like well she will produce like enough breast milk for the whole village. That's kind of one of the side effects. So it's not necessarily a pretty sight, but there's a long history of use, right? And even not even a scientist named John Mark Allegro, who wrote The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, who was not a psychonaut, right? He was not into the psychedelics so much. He was really more focused on deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls. And how he interpreted it is that Jesus Christ was actually an anthropomorphized mushroom, and that all of Christianity was based on this mushroom cult that honored what he claimed to be Amanita muscaria. And the book's very interesting. It's like the book, good read. It's actually banned for quite a few years. Like I think the Christian Church bought the rights to it and then stopped producing it, and now you can get it again. Very fascinating topic. Then Gordon Wasson would argue that Amanita muscaria is part of Soma, which is kind of the ritual secret concoction that the Brahmins in India were using. And it goes on, right? Like it seems that there's a deep cultural significance. We have art pieces of Amanita muscaria in Peru, and Amanita muscaria, to my understanding, has never been found in Peru. So that means that like there was probably, well, we know that cacao was traded from the Amazon jungle to Central America before like Central America started cultivating cacao themselves. But that means that those people that were bringing the cacao from the Amazon to Central America also were bringing stuff back. So what were they bringing back? Perhaps even Amanita muscaria mushrooms. And that's why we have these clay ancient statues found in Peru kind of honoring Amanita muscaria.
Wow. So it is actually prevalent everywhere then. I mean, if you say it's Siberia, right? I know I've heard of that story too, and then South America. So it is probably every climate.
So it doesn't grow in every climate, right? Like it doesn't like growing.
Yeah.
No, there's not. Tropical conditions also not. I think it is somewhere in the southern hemisphere as well, but generally northern hemisphere up to like a certain like temperature.
So it's more like the
generally
forest.
mycorrhiza. You can't grow it, so it creates symbiotic relationships to the roots of trees, pines, right? So you find them under pine trees and spruces, and again, like that has the whole thing with Christmas, and like that's a whole rabbit hole to get into. But they also grow on higher elevation. So like as long as there's conifers, like to an extent they grow. But if there's no conifers, you will not find them.
Oh, interesting. And what are the compounds, active compounds in it then?
Ibotonic acids and muscimol are the main two ones. And muscimol is the one really connected to the more psychedelic journey. You want to have it lower on the ibotonic acid or like very little ibotonic acids.
Okay. Interesting. And any other compound that you deem interesting and that you feel is like not talked about enough?
Well, like mention it. This I think it's 4-ACO-DMT, 5-ACO-DMT, and it has to do with just. Let me see.
Yeah, there's 5-MeO. We know.
Yeah, no, but it's 4-ACO-DMT. It's also known as synthetic shrooms. So these are drops that are very popular in the Netherlands right now. People call it mushroom drops, and you just take one drop of this 4-ACO-DMT, and the experience is relatively like the psilocybin experience, but it's synthetic, and the main issue being that like these there's a lot of products being sold either in mushroom chocolate bars or whatever that contain 4-ACO-DMT but don't contain psilocybin, but they're sold as mushroom-related products. So that's a really big thing to watch out for. It's not necessarily dangerous. To my understanding, it's completely safe to consume, but I think it's dangerous that people are not understanding what they're consuming, and that kind of like again there's marketing involved, right? Like, oh, mushrooms are popular, we call this thing mushrooms, and people are thinking that they're doing mushrooms. I had to tell tons of my friends in the Netherlands, like, what you're taking is not shrooms. If you have you can only take one drop and you feel it, there's no way that's psilocybin, like naturally occurring psilocybin. It's just not possible. To my understanding, maybe somebody made a really concentrated extract of some sort, sure, but like, yeah, even a microdose is 5 or 6 drops of a really concentrated extract, as far as I know. So yeah, I think that's a compound to watch out for and be aware of. Like, I have a friend that I think his tag is Mycology. He just did a really large scale analysis of a lot of these mushroom chocolate bars that were sold in the United States that most of them only contained 4-ACO-DMT and didn't contain psilocybin.
Wow. Okay, nice side note. What's your take on microdosing then?
Microdosing in general, I think there can be benefits. I think there's mainly benefit for like in an integrative practice for myself. I do like microdosing LSD more for productivity than mushrooms, but I do enjoy microdosing mushrooms when I'm doing outside activities. I've played around with many different protocols, and the intuitive protocol works best. It's like, oh, today I feel like taking a microdose more than taking it every day or 4 days on, 3 days off. Yeah. I think I think it's the best if there has been a really powerful psychedelic macrodose, and then kind of in the weeks after, like slowly using it as an integrative tool, and perhaps taking a microdose and like meditating and trying to connect to some of the downloads or messages or lessons, and reconnecting to that. That's how I perceive it to be the most successful. But maybe also my body just doesn't work to it, and like I work with a lot of people that like find a lot more benefit in microdosing than I ever had. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I do like microdosing LSD for productivity, but then I generally crash pretty hard the next day. So I'm really productive one day, and then the next day I'm like, oh, I need to be outside and put my hands in the dirt.
Well, there's only so much energy, right?
Yeah,
it has to come from somewhere. I get that's my take on it as well. I mean, I've tried also niacin and adaptogenics, and like, what's your take on these? Like lion's mane and all these.
I think lion's mane is really good. Like I take a lot of functional / medicinal mushrooms. I like those. The reason that I like them is I think they have like a lot of unique molecules that you don't find anywhere else in nature, that like in vitro and in vivo have shown to have lots of positive effects on humans. So I think it's and it's a naturally occurring like product. So I like consuming those. I just put them in my bulletproof coffee in the morning. I just have all these mushroom extract powders, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole. You have to figure out like how to purchase correct ones, and then you have mycelium grain, which I'm not a fan of. But like those, yes, niacin. I get his idea why, but I personally don't enjoy consuming niacin. I get like these flare-ups, and I get really hot. And like I think it's a really unnatural thing. But there's tons of like turkey tail has lots of naturally occurring niacin. So actually, consuming turkey tail in a relatively high dose would probably get you something similar to the effect that Paul Stamets is portraying, without that annoying flush. And especially if you can like combine it with like a dose of psilocybin or like sacred mushrooms, you end up, I don't know, like that's such a bad start for my microdose, and then I feel like kind of like, oh, I'm happy it's over, and then like I just don't know, it's just not like the nice, and I'm not a fan of.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the Fungi Academy, but like what what are you guys working on? Like I saw you have masterclass, or is it more like a that new thing? It is kind of like masterclass, like, right? Like,
Yeah,
is it
so
live?
it's a
Yeah.
cohort, so it's a 7-week
Yeah.
container with like really amazing
Okay.
practitioners. It's the psychedelic Journeywork cohort. So it's really focused towards people that like are already in practice, and maybe perhaps serving psychedelics to people, or have a pretty dedicated self practice, or are slowly getting into it and are looking to learn more. And just full disclaimer, this is not going to make you a psychedelic official certified teacher or any of that. This is really focused on people that are on the path of learning and want to deepen their path of learning, and want to do this with amazing, amazing teachers with some of the like hundreds of years of collective psychedelic work that we have in the facilitator team, and like a group of other people from all over the world, peers from all over the world that are doing similar work, and we're getting together every week and like sharing wisdom and sharing like our experiences that have happened. And I think it's again this to loop it back to, it's kind of like a psychedelic focused human group of people of sharing, but also learning and growing together. And I'm really looking forward to that. So you can like go to the website fungiacademy.com and you'll find it, or just look psychedelic Journeywork cohort, or go to our Instagram page, and that's the thing coming up. And if you want to learn how to grow mushrooms, you can like come to our spot in Guatemala. We do cultivation courses. We have one coming up in October, and then one in December and January, etc. But yeah, it's very exciting.
Very cool. Okay, nice, man. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for inviting me.
Great.
It was great.
Yeah, perfect. And we'll link everything in the show notes. And yeah, I hope I see you. At some point again, man. We'll go in some depth on some of these topics.
Yeah, man.
Cool. All right, perfect.
Let's see. Thanks for inviting me. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for watching this episode to the end. If you got any value out of this, please like and subscribe, or share it with a friend. This would help the channel a lot. Thank you for that. And I hope I will see you on the next one.